Kristen Hasson is the founder and principal of Outcomes for Pets Consulting and a nationally respected animal welfare leader focused on strengthening foster-based care and community programs. She has worked with shelters across the country to reduce barriers to fostering and improve outcomes for both animals and the people who care for them. Hi, and welcome to Dog Fostering 101. I'm Jackie Adams, foster mom and learning and development professional. This podcast is for anyone who's new to fostering, thinking about saying yes for the first time, or navigating those early days and looking for practical tips, because fostering changes lives at both ends of the leash. Thanks so much for joining us, Kristen.
Thanks for having me.
So when you zoom out nationally, what data tells you that the sheltering landscape is dramatically shifting right now?
Well, the animal sheltering landscape isn't necessarily dramatically shifting in the ways that we think. In fact, we're close to 2019 numbers when it comes to intakes. So we're taking in roughly the same number of animals we were prior to the pandemic. The pandemic was the fundamental disruption. It changed everything for animal sheltering in both really positive and really negative ways. And so we're kind of going back to where we were, which isn't necessarily a good thing. A lot more animals are probably entering shelters than need to, and maybe more significantly, fewer are leaving than should be, and they're staying longer. The animal shelters are terribly stressful on any animal that goes into one, even the best shelters. They're quite traumatic, and animals are staying in them longer. And so I'm a consultant that works nationally. I work some internationally, and across the US, we see animals really languishing in shelters. And it's heartbreaking because they're great animals that should be in homes with families.
Agreed. So based on what you're seeing from, let's keep it at national trends for right now. Based on what you're seeing on those trends, what do we understand about which animals benefit the most from fostering, and why is that?
Everybody benefits from fostering, whether it's a bunny, a guinea pig, a cat, a dog. However, the bottleneck in animal shelters, the animals that are staying the longest, are big dogs. And when we say big dogs, we mean any dog that lives in a kennel designed for a dog over 20 pounds. So these are generally, when you walk through your animal shelter and you think about those side-by-side kennels that you see, those are the dogs staying longest. They're any 30 pounds and up, typically between 40 and 70 pound dogs. They're staying the longest, and we don't entirely know why, though. We can speculate that housing restrictions make it quite difficult to own a medium and large dog. People are living in more precarious ways due to economic uncertainty, and so they're having to move around more. We have certainly impacts from the current political situation in the United States. So people are having to move rapidly and their animals are getting left behind. And those animals that are most likely to stick around in kennels are medium and large dogs.
So let's zoom back and look at this from a shelter perspective. If a shelter wants to make a truly foster-centric shift, what are a few metrics that they should track or stop tracking in order to guide that change?
Well, let me go back to what animals benefit most from foster. I guess I didn't quite finish talking about that because we look at what animals are the most negatively impacted by sheltering right now. And so that is, in my mind, going to be animals that are staying longest in the system. And that's why fostering is so important for medium and large dogs. And we try to look at metrics for everything, but for organizations that aren't really doing foster, I think they're approaching the problem the wrong way. Most animal shelters start a foster program with 0 staff members or 1 staff member dedicated to it. At the same time, they have 10, 20, 50, 100 or more staff dedicated to caring for animals in the shelter. And so we're under-resourcing the opportunity. Like, we're not even giving foster a chance to work. And shelters have to start thinking differently about this. We know the most successful foster programs have multiple staff allocated to them, and they also allow every staff member to be part of fostering. So I think we have to shift how we think about the problem and the solution. would never try to run an animal shelter with 500 animals in it with one person. And in the same vein, we shouldn't be trying to run massive foster programs with one or even zero staff members allocated to them.
You mind if I touch on then what kind of metrics we should be looking at then, or tracking or not tracking with respect to foster programs?
We'll be looking at how many fosters we have, how many new fosters we're bringing on, and how many animals are going to foster. Lifeline Animal Project is the municipal shelters for the Atlanta metro area. They are really leading the pack when it comes to fostering. They sent 12,000 animals to foster. Some of those were repeats, animals that went a couple of times, but they outpace everyone in foster care. And so they're constantly onboarding new fosters. One of the other problems we see a lot in the shelters we work with is shelters onboard people for foster. It's a cumbersome process. It takes a long time. And then they're always asking for help from that same group of people. And rather, we want the ask for foster should be a public ask all the time. Like anyone should be able to join fostering at any time and get started right away. And so when we look at success metrics, we're looking at how many new fosters are you bringing in every month? How many of them are actually taking home animals? And then how many of those animals are getting adopted? And when we look at those, we know that the outcomes for dogs in particular that go to foster, and this is true of cats as well, but we have recent data showing that the animals that go to foster are much more likely to be adopted more quickly.
I've heard that you often work with decision makers outside of animal welfare, and I was curious what kind of data points you have that are most persuasive when we're taking this information, taking these metrics that we've been talking about, or other ones, and bringing those to boards or to funders or to elected officials.
This is a really contested topic for a few reasons, but one of those is that it depends on who you're talking to and what their motivation is. And it really depends on what the values of a particular community are. So sometimes we talk about cost because to take care of an animal in a shelter on any given day, it can be anywhere from $45 to $100 or more a day. When that animal goes to foster, the cost to the animal services agency is usually zero, or if they're paying for supplies, it's the cost of food. So we talk about dollars saved, and then we also talk about capacity. And we want people to think about foster homes like kennels. Like every foster home is an extra kennel for your organization. So I've run 3 animal shelters, and in all of those organizations, we have had at least as many animals in foster as in the shelter. And so we talk about capacity. Like I'm working with 2 communities now that they don't have enough kennels for all the animals that are coming in. They just simply don't have enough. So they can do 2 things. They can invest in a capital project and build a whole lot more kennels, which is going to require more staffing, or they can make a massive investment in foster. And I would argue that that investment in foster has a better return. It doesn't create this long-term burden on a government or nonprofit. And so again, I have been doing fostering for 15 years. And when I started, the only foster programs were for orphan puppies and kittens and sick animals. And they were very few and far between. Myself and a couple of colleagues really were the first people to start sending healthy adult animals to foster. And it was immediately a game changer. We started to see safer shelters, less stressed animals, more adoptions. These can all be valuable metrics depending on what that community values and what problem they're trying to solve. And so it really depends on who we're talking to. But what we encourage shelters to do is just try something. Like try taking your 10 longest stay dogs, that the ones that don't have serious behavioral challenges. That's a whole nother podcast topic. But your 10 longest stay animals that have just been sitting around, send them to foster and see what happens, and then track those metrics. Just by doing those 10 animals, you'll be able to show your government officials or your nonprofit board how much were those animals costing, what was the burden to the organization before they went to foster, what happened after they went to foster, were you able to get them adopted? That alone is a manageable piece for most organizations, and that's their proof of concept that they need.
And that's something that's definitely come up in different conversations that we've had, going back to your idea of, yes, we can make our shelters bigger, but there is always going to be a finite number of kennels or runs that we're going to have in that, versus the fostering system, if we look at it as a system, has more of that ability to flex and grow and adjust based on the needs that we're currently experiencing at the shelter. So I like the approach to that, and I like the idea of looking at it as a system to consider what kind of resources then we are using to, because you can have a system, but if you're not supporting that system and growing that system and fostering that system, then it's not a healthy system.
We're not even giving it a chance. I think the reality is we're not giving foster a chance to work in the US. And if you look at the child foster care system, it's hard to use that as an example, right? Because people always point to the problems. Like, well, okay, the foster system is broken this way, this way, this way. Those things are true, but the alternative would be a massive orphanage system in the US. And, foster care has solved so many problems, and we don't talk about that enough. And we need to think about animal foster care in the same way. So we should be subsidizing foster care. The foster caregivers should be subsidized, especially when they're taking more challenging animals. If you make me stay awake with a litter of kittens overnight who are pooping on me and need to be bottle fed, like, a subsidy is appropriate for that. And it would cost far less than caring for those animals in shelter. And we also need to staff them appropriately and have as many staff dedicated to foster as we do other areas. And we need a strategy around foster. I think a lot of shelters start a foster program and they're like, okay, we're going to send a bunch of animals out. And then you have frustrated caregivers. You don't have a plan to have them come back for medical care. So your vets get frustrated. And then somebody says, we're calling the whole thing off. And that's a wrong way to approach this. And I think shelters need the headspace, the time, the staffing to really think about what would it look like to build a system versus a foster program. So I'm really interested in foster systems for animal sheltering as a whole.
Yeah, and I'm a computer engineer, as an engineer nerd who loves systems, I couldn't agree more. And that was kind of the impetus for this podcast, is because my sister actually fosters kids, and I think that's amazing and a beautiful calling, and I don't have the capacity to do that. But when I started fostering dogs and we started comparing notes, that I think it's great and it's very necessary to have a fostering system for kids that's so well built up, with nonprofit groups that advocate for fostering, and these organizations that do the training, and then the organizations that support the fostering, and all these different things. And I'm like, yes, that is great that we have a well-established system that needs a lot of support and is continuing to grow and needs to grow. And also, when I looked over here at the dog fostering side, and I'm like, there is a lot of low-hanging fruit for the structure that we don't even necessarily need to rebuild. We can take aspects of that system and apply over here. But I'd be curious what you have to say about this. But from my limited perspective, it's either because we're already so overburdened with just doing the day in and day out, or for whatever other reasons that we haven't tried to duplicate some aspects of the system into the dog fostering world. Do you want to weigh in on that one?
It's an important conversation because it gets back to the root of the problem, which is rabies control. And rabies has been used as a catalyst for building dog pounds, and dog pounds are meant as a public health and safety function in a community. They are not designed to help animals get out alive. They're not designed to get them into homes. They are meant to contain those animals who potentially pose a risk to rabies. And it's a tremendous success story for public health. But animal shelters, from the beginning, from their inception, were just not designed for this stuff. And we still today, rabies control is the primary function of most animal control agencies and many animal shelters. And until we get past that, we're going to struggle to build a foster-centric model because it's not in conflict with that, but foster-centric model wouldn't make, rabies control would not be the primary imperative for that. And that's something you don't hear a lot in the public discourse around animal sheltering, but almost everything can be traced back to that quarantine function of any animal that could potentially pose a risk is going to be housed here, quarantined, and then destroyed, and everything has been built on top of that. So spay neuter has been built on top of that. And many of our life-saving programs have been built on top of that. There's a reason animals don't become available for a certain period of time. Like, they are there for that stray hold, that rabies hold function. If they've bitten someone, then they become available. But availability for an adoption is not a given in the system. Some shelters still don't do adoptions. Like there is not uncommon to find shelters that outcomes is just not something they do. They have to be transferred to another organization. So I think we need to reckon with some of that history and look at what do we want the future to be. And the future should be foster-centric. We should have very few animals in shelters. They are not better off there. They're not better off. There are maybe 1 in 1,000 animal shelters have overnight medical staff. Animals are being left alone from the time the shelter closes to the next day whenever someone gets there. That is often like 4 p.m. to 7 a.m. completely left alone. The animals are not better off staying there. And that idea that somehow, well, they're safer here, it's not true. But we really have to take these ideas apart and think through, like, what could we do differently than what we're doing now? The problem, and I'm almost done. And so we're trying to do the old thing. To your point, we're inundated doing the old reactive pound model thing to the extent that we can't build the new thing. And that is the problem we're sitting in now. So podcasts like yours, conversations that are being had both in and outside the movement, like these are the things that will move us forward to reconsidering what we're doing.
And that's interesting that you said that, because I had heard the rabies thing mentioned in passing at some point in time after being a volunteer for several months and a foster for several months. But again, it was just lightly touched on. Now that you're saying it, I can see that that would make sense, that the system was created around that. And I can see that if adjustments weren't made, then that's what the metrics are based on. That's what the focus is on. And whenever you have a system, you look at the goals and then you build a system surrounding the goals. And so you're not going to make the necessary adjustments. So thank you for providing that context and that history for it. As we look ahead 5 years, let's say, what early signals or trends in the data give you a sense of where sheltering is heading?
Well, what was really exciting during the pandemic was that that those exciting and pandemic shouldn't go together. And I don't want to in any way say that it was positive. It was not positive. It was horrible. So many people lost their animals or animals lost their people, right? Like the pandemic was terrible. But what did happen is most animals were housed in foster. We made a huge shift. It was something like 45% of the total shelter population went to foster homes. Shelters cleared out. And what does that tell us? It tells us the homes are there, the people want to help, we are the barrier. Animal shelters have to get out of their own way and start saying yes to the public who wants to help. There's a variety of reasons they don't do that now, but it showed us what was possible. And I go back to that moment because we were looking at the data, we were seeing the empty kennels. We had shelters that had euthanized 15,000 animals a year, suddenly euthanizing fewer than 3,000 animals a year. Like the change was massive and it was fast and it taught us it was possible. And that's where I see us going, is actually stripping away the no's to get to what is possible. And what is possible is that all these animals could be in homes. Suzanne Kogut of Petco Love, she said this thing that I think changed my life, which is 2% more pet owners, more current pet owners fostered, we would end needless euthanasia in shelters. And I think that's true. And so there are myself and other people that if we do anything in our career, it's to shift the majority of animals to foster from shelter so that foster becomes the normal solution for most animals rather than being housed in a cage.
So, Kristen, with the work that you do, it is nice for us to be able to take a step back and look at this all big picture. You typically, on my episodes, it's practical insights for everyday fosterers. So let me bring it around to this. For fosters that are listening, what is the number one piece of data insight that illuminates the impact that they're having on a dog's life?
I think that every time that you foster an animal, it's important to remember that you're not just saving that animal, you're saving the animal that went into the kennel that animal can now occupy. So it's always a 2-for-1 deal. It's often more than that because you can move several animals through that kennel. So you really have twice the impact you think you're having by fostering that animal. And we're dealing with a situation now where whether you're fostering for a nonprofit or your government shelter, you are clearing out a bottleneck so that more animals can move through the system, and the system's really stuck. So my advice to fosters would be to keep moving animals through. And I think that we need to think more for serious fosters who are like, I want to do something. I think we need to start thinking about like a micro sheltering, a world of micro sheltering where you can set up your house and have several fosters moving through at any time. Whenever we talk about this, people are like, hoarding. And it's like, no, there are committed fosters who are really serious about this, who can have a litter of kittens in one place, who can be fostering a dog somewhere, who are keeping those animals moving through. Adopters get to come to your house and meet the animal, which is a way better way to meet an animal that you're considering adopting. So that model is practiced in places like Costa Rica, where there are a lot more rescuers that have a small number of animals in their home at any given time that they're keeping moving through. The problem is the organizations that used to take in a lot of animals from government shelters are not taking in as many. So we need the individuals doing this on the ground to be doing a little bit more, a little bit faster. And by doing that, we can solve this problem. I think we're close to the end of euthanasia for space in animal shelters. If we all just push a little harder, do one more animal this year, do one more animal at a time in your house, and don't do 15 animals in your house. Like if we each do one more, nobody has to do 15 or 20. None of us should have to do that. It's not good for the animals either. I have met in my career probably 50 to 100 really serious fosters who could be doing more in a way that if they had the help to do it, they could be in a better support system set up. If they had someone sending adopters to their home, like that's where we have to start working a little bit differently and build more trust between the bigger shelters and the people doing rescue and adoption. So lowering barriers is critical to that. And if you are a foster who's working with an organization that is putting barriers in your way, most communities have many organizations that you can, at least a couple organizations you can work with. Find one that doesn't put roadblocks in your way to getting animals out and getting them adopted. You should be able to do your own adoption counseling. A lot of orgs even allow you to do the adoption process yourself without that animal having to go back to the shelter.
And the good thing with having these episodes is you're saying a couple of themes that we have heard in different interviews. Just to call those out, is that you don't have to be good with every single aspect of it, that there can be community support who comes alongside you, whether that is the staff or the volunteers or other fosters who can support each other, so we don't have to do all the things all at the same level, and that there are different organizations who decide what their setup looks like and which aspects the fosters are expected to do. And so if the organization that you're currently working with does not seem like the best fit for you, it's not like you're doing it wrong or they're doing it wrong, but it might just be starting to date the organizations, put some feelers out, and foster a little bit so that you have that perspective of what would make a good fit. Kristen, I really appreciated how you, even if you did coin the term micro sheltering, I think is a great term, and also giving that insight about the background about rabies with respect to the shelters is really helpful for me to understand what I'm seeing in the systems now. If the listeners want to continue to learn from you and follow you, what is the best way for them to do so?
Two ways. I'm Kristen Hasson on LinkedIn. I write and talk about this stuff all the time. Also, my company, my consulting company is Outcomes for Pets. You can find us online and learn more about the work we do. But also, we have a lot of resources on that site for fosters, volunteers, and anyone trying to help. I think we want to democratize helping animals. And the challenge now is that there's still a lot of gatekeeping. And so we encourage anybody to reach out who's doing cool work in your community or who needs help just working through a challenge or a barrier in your own community.
That sounds great. We'll include a link to your website in the show notes. Kristen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Dog Fostering 101, everything I wish I knew when I began fostering. This episode was edited by Make Your Day Richer. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to follow us and check us out on Facebook and Instagram. Now go cuddle a pup and have a great day.